Now, in the previous presentation, we went through quite a few things. We determined net worth. We have asked quite a few questions about financial stability and how we can assess and evaluate our present situational awareness when it comes to finance. And I'd like to ask you two questions right off the bat. Do you think that it's possible to become financially independent? And when I mean financially independent, I'm not meaning, again, to become rich overnight. I'm just saying meeting your liabilities and making sure you have a decent, good level of living. Is it possible?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Is it? Okay, so by show of hands, how many of you think it's possible to have that? Okay, so pretty much 100%. Good. Now let me ask you the second question. How and what do you need to do to be able to be financially independent?
A good savings account.
A good savings account. That's a very good suggestion. Debt's paid. Good job. What about in the back? You guys are giggling like two teenagers.
Pay attention to things, I guess.
Pay attention to things like the presenter, right?
All what you're presenting there, yeah.
There you go. What else?
Not have a wife and kids.
Not have a wife and kids. Oh boy. This is Montana wisdom for you. I learned that always when you ask a question, wait for that particular smart thing to say.
Maybe sell the horse.
Or maybe sell a horse. You see, these are very realistic and very good answers. The last one that you mentioned, I know someone who has quite a few horses. And one time I asked them, okay, how much it costs you to board and house the horses? And I didn't know at all. My wife has been, for the past several years, engaged in training horses for show jumping and dressage. And I knew that that is a very expensive sport, if you will. But when it comes to Montana, those rules don't apply here because it's a way lower cost of living, way low. It's just a different environment. But when I asked that person how much would it cost to house and board a horse, what do you think they would tell me? What do you think that cost? On Montana level, right here.
Depends on if you own the land or not.
That's right. It's several $100s a month. Anywhere between $200 to $400 to $500 a month. And think about it. That is a huge chunk against the disposable income that we have coming in. And if you or I, statistically speaking, are part of the 76% who are living from paycheck to paycheck, that is a huge chunk right off from our discretionary spending, if we can call it that way, if we have any discretionary spending. So you see how becoming financially independent in terms of goal setting, this is the second part when we are talking about goal setting. You and I have to ask ourselves some fundamental and honest questions. Because you cannot go on to become financially independent if you're not honest with yourselves or myself about how we spend our money. This is the reason why it was so important in the first exercise when I mentioned earlier to track your finance for 30 days. Everything that comes in, everything that goes out, because then by the end of the month, you'll know exactly if you're in a deficit spending or surplus territory. And I would even say, instead of doing it only 1 month, I would do it for about 3 to 6 months, because 1 month could be a fluke. And I'll give you a short little story about budgeting. We didn't used to budget in our household, and we didn't spend much, but there were a few things here and there, and we kind of didn't catch. There were extra spending, that's what I'm trying to say. And then when I read the statistic that on average people spend, if you don't have a budget and if you spend on credit, you spend anywhere between 12 to 18% more than if you would have a budget and you would spend on cash. I said, wait a second, 12 to 80%, that's 18%. That's a lot of money going out from a discretionary fund. So we started doing a budget, and for the first 3 months, it was hit and miss with budgeting, and we'll get to that in a little bit later. But the bottom line is, if you do something on a repetitive basis for several times instead of a one-time deal, you have a better rate for accuracy and you better research data for your financial background than if you do it once. So I would say, when you track your money, do it for several months in a row. Don't only do it one time. You can start with June and see how it works, and you might be able to do half of the month and you kind of forget or get tired of it or whatnot. Don't despair. It's normal. Okay? It's normal. Do it again in July. Do it again in August. And by the time you get to the end of the year, you will have this systematic thing going on and you will know exactly where your money goes. Do you know how liberating that is? I mean, it was so cool to know. I mean, I know exactly how many bills I have. It used to have, when I sat down to make family finance, it took me several hours. Literally, it takes me less than 20 minutes now. Once a month, I sit down, and I'll tell you exactly how we do this later but in the budgeting section, but I'll sit down for 20 minutes, I make finance, we're done, period. That's it. And for the next month, we don't even worry about finance. Some of it is on autopilot, some of it is cash, some of it is directly from deposit, from checking accounts and whatnot. It's just phenomenal. It's liberating. You don't have to kind of, okay, am I going to make it? Am I going to have to pay more extra to the bank or whatnot? You don't have those worries anymore. So coming back to the financial independence piece of our presentation, it is step number 1 to know where your money goes. And then after that, you're right, here you go. Every single component of financial independence in terms of goal setting, we are talking about goal setting, comes with hard choices. Don't you think so? And I tell you why. When we set a goal, you are telling yourself, I'm telling myself, I used to do this way, but from now on, I'll do it this way. I'm looking around the room and I see on average we're about 40 and up. Or I should say 50 and up, okay? I'm probably the only 40-some-year-old in the room. The rest of you guys are in the 50s and up.
We just look for it.
Or we just look for it, there you go. But the point is, after a certain age, and I'm not going to define what that age is. I'm going to leave it to sociologists, anthropology, and psychology, okay? After a certain age, it is way more difficult to change. If you don't believe me, try it. Look at that cupboard that you said you're going to clean for X amount of days, and I'm not going to say years, okay? It's still there. Or look at that garage that has that improvement to be done and you never have time for it. Or look at that corner in your life, whatever that is, psychologically or socially or economically or emotionally. We procrastinate because change is difficult. Because change entails to look at yourself, look at myself and say, wait a second, am I doing this right? And when I have a latte, I know most of you guys don't drink lattes, and I know that when you have, or let's not stick with latte, let's just do sunflower seeds at $1.49 a piece, right? Every week one. It's about $6 a month, right? If you do that $6 a month times 12, that's a good little chunk, only one thing. So saying, oh, I'm not going to buy this anymore, I'm going to deny myself this particular latte or sunflower seeds or that jerky at the gas station or whatever, I don't even care what it is. But the point is, it is very difficult to say no to yourself because it's habitual, ingrained behavior within your brain matter. There's a wonderful book by a neurobrain surgeon that wrote a book about how difficult it is to change for human beings. It's just a phenomenal book. And it says that it's actually, when you do the same thing over and over, you're actually creating new path grooves over the surface of your brain. Now think about that. You're physically altering the way you cognitively think. And after 40 or 50 years, I come up on the scene and say, hey, would you like to change your behavior financially speaking? You look at me, what's wrong with you, mister? The point is, it's difficult. It's not easy. But the alternative to this is potentially fiscal ruin if you don't take care of it. So many people end up in the poorhouse. So many people end up on the streets. They lose everything because they don't have the ability and the desire to change. And change is difficult. I mean, don't you believe in slogans, political slogans, yes you can, or whatever the case might be? No, the change is extremely difficult because it's a level of psychology. And when you think about that and you look at yourself and you introspectively reflect on who you are, somehow, for some reason, denying yourself things equates to who you are, and you think you're less of a man because you can't afford it, whatever, or a woman. It's very complicated. I'm not going to go into that part too much. But the point is, if you don't change, It's not going to change. You're not going to have a different life, financially speaking. So we have to change. Is it easy? No, it's difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to tell you that it's easy because it's not. I struggle personally with things. In my personal life, when it comes to finance, I struggled with it for several years, and I said, well, you just have to quit that particular thing. I used to drink Coca-Cola. I used to love that stuff. Oh man, Coca-Cola is here for a reason after 100 and some years. They know how to make good stuff, isn't it? But if you buy it on a consistent basis, and that becomes part of who you are, that's not good for the long run. So I decided to quit Coca-Cola. And doesn't mean that I don't drink it every now and then, every few years or whatever. Or I'm not totally off of it, if you will. I just wanted to be honest. But I don't do it anymore on a daily basis. I do it once or twice a year. Period. Because that costs money. Isn't it? Now, you can substitute that with anything else. It could be latte, it could be sunflower seeds, it could be whatever the case. David Bach says, he calls it the latte factor. Now, you always have to, when you change, you always have to reduce liabilities and always have to increase assets. Period. Now, how do you do that as a goal setting? I would be a little dark on this one. Please forgive me, but I'm not trying to scare you or make you feel guilty. But the way you form goals is to kind of look at the finality of your last moment. And if you can't do that, think about someone who has cancer or a very difficult disease or illness in your family or whatnot, and transport your mind frame to that particular moment and say, okay, this person, or I, Andrew, or whoever you are, I might have X amount of days on this planet, and I'm done. And if you believe in God, in divinity, then you have a second chance in the afterlife. If you don't believe in God, then that's it for you. Period. You don't have a second chance. Once you're dead, the finality of that moment is going to be hitting you. That's it. No more. Okay? Period. So then come backwards from that moment, from the finality of your grave, come backwards and kind of make that mathematical mental exercise. How many years do you have left? Okay, so let's say some of you are 60, some of you are 70, some of us are 40, and in between. So we have anywhere between 20, 30, 40 years to live, if we're lucky. Okay, if you're blessed enough to live without any major hitches. So then again, decompose that part. It says, okay, so what am I going to fill this time with? The 40, 20 years, or whatever I have. Let's say I have 20 or 30. Well, X amount, 46% of people will have to work because they will not be able to afford retirement. Right? Then if you slice that further, that slice of time, what kind of a quality of life will I have in those years? Will I still be paying mortgage? Will I still pay interest on my car, on my house, on my credit cards to other people and enrich them? Which again is not evil, it's just business. Everything costs money. When the Fed prints our money, the government already pays interest on that every single dollar that is printed. So from the inception of our monetary system, we always pay interest. It's just the way we do business. That's not evil. Some people might have a problem with that. I don't. It's just the way we do business in the market economy. Okay? So the question then is for us, for you and I, is in this very short amount of time, what is my financial goal for the rest of my life? What is it? And how do I set it? Because I'm running out of time here. If I have only 20 years to live, what's my goal? Eating Alpo for the rest of my life or dog food? And you laugh, but it's true. Dave Ramsey tells us in one of his radio programs that there were people who are so poor they could not afford to buy except cat and dog food to eat. I read a Michigan story about an elderly gentleman who could not afford to have his power on, and he froze to death, and they found him several days later because he didn't have any relatives, and somebody had I can't remember how the story went. They went into his house, or somehow they found out that he was dead, and it was several days after, and he was solidly froze to death. And the reason, because he couldn't afford his power bill. electric bill. Now think about it. That shouldn't happen in our country. That should not happen because we live in the best country on the planet. I mean, I believe this. This is cool. And yet still it happened. So then, how do I do this? Well, the very first thing, and we'll hammer this a little bit in a different presentation, but I personally believe that the best way to become financially independent is not to be beholden to anyone in terms of finances. No more debt. Period. Now, I know that this is a very difficult statement because, as I said earlier, our whole economic system is predicated, is premised on debt, on consumption. You and I are paleted, are presented with debt as a product. And this is the problem that we have. This is why we have to change our mind frame. Our lucidity of mind has to change because we used to think in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, oh, I have a charge card. I'm someone now. I have prestige because I have a MasterCard or a Visa card or an American Express card or whatever the charge card was. And it was actually a symbol of propriety and a symbol of if you've arrived, if you have a charge card. And they played on that. It's just a marketing. Again, it's nothing evil. It's just a marketing gimmick the same way as that they're marketing to you everything. Again, this is not evil. It's just business. So how do I get out of that? What do you think?
How many cards?
That's true, but we have to decrease our liabilities and increase our assets. Period. We have to change the way we think. Period. Because that is the biggest obstacle in becoming financially independent. It is. I mean, we'll get to that in a little bit. Debt is the one biggest issue between you having an American nightmare or having an American dream. Now, I want to lift you up a little bit and be positive on this one. How many still believe that America is the country where you can have the American dream and have it and enjoy it and live it? You believe that?
You bet.
How many of you guys have debt? So what's the dissonance on this? How do we correlate? I have house debt, of course. How do we correlate? How do we manage those two dysfunctional or two opposite things? This is a very dystopian notion, which means that I have debt, tons of debt. I'm paying a lot of interest, but I still believe the American dream is possible. Think about it. Think about it. Do you know that we, on average, the American average, we have debt, like a household debt, we have mortgage debt, we have car debt, we have medical debt, we have student debt. What am I leaving out?
Candy.
Okay, some people have candy debt, I guess. Charge card, store card debts, like Macy's or whatever, some of these department debt, store debts. In fact, there's such a load that some of the banks would not service certain categories of people who have low credit scores because of their debt loads. So then there is a shark industry going on right now. They call them payday loans and payday facilities where you go there and they charge you catastrophic amounts of interest when you compound it for a whole year. You go there and you borrow $100, for example, and then they charge you $25 or $30 on that $100, and you think it's not a bad deal, it's just 25%. But what happens 2 weeks later when the note is due or the debt is due, you are not able to make that, so you roll over that, and then you have compounding interest. Then you have to pay interest and another fee. So when you do that several times, several cycles over, and there are some regulars, or what the industry calls it, the revolvers, because they're revolving all the time their loans into new and new loans, by the time you make that compounding towards the whole year, sometimes that interest goes into the thousands of percentages, which is just an astounding ripoff, if you will. Okay? So it is very, very important to realize that changing our behavior is the very first thing to do. Now, changing behavior is a mental exercise. And mental exercises are very difficult because it involves identity, it involves culture, it involves background, it involves a lot of different things. For example, the way your parents used to do finance is most likely the way you do finance too. If your parents have always managed their checkbook properly, you most likely that you picked up that habit and you do the same thing. If your parents did not do that, you most likely, it is not a fast rule, okay? There are exceptions, but it's most likely that you will do the same behavior because you have been modeled that behavior from the past. Or if your parents have always loaded up on debt all the time, then you're more likely to have a laissez-faire or very easy thinking when it comes to credit. You don't think much of it. Oh, I'll pay it off. Oh, just a little interest here and there. It's not a big deal. I'll just move on. So you see how it is very, very important to think about these things because that's how you change your goals. That's how you change your behavior on a mental process. For example, if money was very important in your family and you realize that having certain things and certain lifestyle object or certain lifestyle that will tell you that you have arrived, and people do this all the time, trust you me. They buy certain things because they want to show a particular facade to the outer world when the inside is not there or the finances are not there. That is very bad because that's the mirroring capability for the next generation. And I want you to stop here and think about it. What happens is not only you or I are engaged in a behavior that is detrimental, financially speaking, but unknowingly, almost unconsciously, we're modeling the same behavior to the next generation and we're messing up the next generation. Think about it. And the next generation will come, well, mom, dad never told me about this. We never talked about money because it was a taboo. Have you heard that before? Oh, we never talked about sex. We never talked about money. And we never talked about this. Oh, no. I can't talk about money. I'll give you an exercise. If you have an elderly parent who is a certain age, and you are a certain age, let's say 60s and up, which is not what I'm just saying, do you have the guts? Are you able to talk unencumbered with your parents about nursing home? Are you able to go to your mom and dad and say, hey mom, dad, don't you think it's time to consider nursing home? What would be the reaction? Why do you think that it's such a fierce reaction, such a visceral reaction? Well, independence is one thing, but I think that the communication part was there. I mean, in the past, there was a lack of a communication issue between the generation, and there was a generation gap, if I would say this. And it's very difficult to talk to people who have lived through the depression and all that. It's called Dave Ramsey calls the baby powdering syndrome. Once your mom or dad powdered your derriere, it's very difficult to turn around and tell them what to do when it comes to finance. Mm-hmm. Isn't that true? Mm-hmm. How do you turn around and tell my mom, you're old, you can't take care of yourself anymore, we have to get you into a nursing home? It's difficult. So, how do we change? I promised you a couple of the statistics here. The revolving debt, and this is a little bit of a dated material already, $803 billion of debt, revolving debt, which means credit card debt. All the time. People never pay off their balance. They always carry the balance. They always pay the interest rate on a credit card. Average household in 2012 was about $15,000 in debt, give or take a few hundred. Think about that. I mean, do you know, it's enormous amounts of money is made on interest. I mean, if I were to advise anybody, I'm not advising, but if I were to invest, I would invest in banks. I don't do it because of personal reasons, but think about it. Banks are sometimes, not always, depending on the regulatory environment, depends on the economic cycles, but they make a tremendous amount of profit off of you and I because we don't think. And I'm not saying this derogatorily. It's just the way they do business. More than 46% of American households carry debt at any given time. Half of the population, it's over 150 million people in this country alone. So what is there to do? First thing, stop incurring new debt. This should be the number one goal when we set goals for financial independence. The number one, and I'm not going to give you a lot of different statistics and a lot of goal setting things because you will forget them. You won't be able to spend a lot of mental energy on remembering things. It's just the way we work. But this one thing you have to remember, we have to stop spending money. And I'm not talking about spending money on bread or whatever. You have to spend money on the average stuff that you have to live on. You have to subsist. But what I'm trying to say is you don't want to spend money that you don't have.
Right.
You cannot. And if you ask, well, I never do that. Well, how in the world is it that 46% of Americans carry debt every single month? That means that out of the 10 people, 5 have debt in this particular setting, statistically speaking. So, you or me or whoever, we carry debt. And it's not household, it's not mortgage debt, it's revolving debt or discretionary debt. Think about that. That's a staggering amount of money. We cannot afford to have new debt incurred. We have to start there. We have to start with debt, and we'll get to that 2 days from now. Tomorrow we'll talk about budgeting, and then after that we'll talk about managing debt and servicing debt, how to do that. But I want to give you just a little bit of preview before we finish up. We have about 20 more minutes left to go, and how we can start that monster, that dragon, if you will. How do we slay that dragon? Number one goal for all of us should be this: stop making new debt, period. There's no magic button to this. I think most of us, the reason why we think, oh, it's so difficult is because it's not difficult. You don't deal with the money. Money is immoral. Money is not bad. Money is not good. Money doesn't have feelings, doesn't get hurt. Money is not evil. Okay? The reason why it's so difficult to change is because it involves me. How do I tell myself I should have not bought that thing? 5 out of 10 of us buy things unnecessarily and carry debt. Period. So we have to be somehow come to that point. If you have to go to a shrink and talk about your past, about your financial situation within your family or whatnot, that if you have to have a best friend, you can open up and say, hey, this is why I'm so messed up financially, or whatever it takes for you and I to kind of come to that one first point, that evaluation phase, right? As we talked in the previous presentation, when you evaluate and assess your present situation, you always want to talk about, why am I here? Why am I overspending? And that's the psychological or the emotional component. And there's various reasons and there's various ideas of why, but think about your present situation. Why am I spending more money than I have? And don't feel bad about it. Some of it is pure negligence. Some of it is psychology. Some of it is neurotic behavior. Some of it is whatever. It doesn't make any difference why. You don't do this exercise because you want to blame yourself. That, oh man, I'm such a horrible person because I'm spending more money. That's not the point of this exercise. The point of this exercise is to understand yourself and your behavior. Because if I understand why am I spending, then you have a starting point of how to change. Now, change again is not easy. It's difficult. But if you just kind of, okay, I'm not going to spend money today anymore, guess what? You're going to last 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever, like a New Year's resolution, and you're going to be back to square one. Don't you think so? Period. So, number one in goal setting is stop incurring new debt. Period. Period. I don't have credit card debt, for example, but I had 9 credit cards at one point. Now, why do I need 9 credit cards?
You don't.
I don't. In the beginning, you started having credit cards because that was the way to build up credit. And we'll talk about that later. But my credit is excellent. You can go higher than excellent.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, there's a difference in pointage. I mean, now you have 850 or 860 points or whatever. But after 830 something, the classification is excellent. So I don't care about 2, 3, 4, 5 points if it's excellent anyways, right? So why do you need more credit? You don't. It's unnecessary after a particular threshold is passed. Same thing. The first thing, you have to stop incurring debt. I know I'm repetitive. I know I'm saying this a lot of times, but the reason I'm doing that is so we can get it, so we can have this as a muscle memory in our brain. We have to stop spending more money. Period. We cannot spend more money. Now, when we have a little more money, with the debt that we already have accumulated, then we always have to pay the minimum amount, and this is just the surface skimming of a different lecture that we'll have on debt management. But first we have to pay the minimum always, if we can, and we'll get to that point a little bit later, so we can be current, because if not, we'll have more fees and all that kind of stuff. We have to snowball our debts, which means if we have, on average, most Americans have several different kinds of debt, even in credit cards. We have a MasterCard, we have Visa, we have American Express, Discover, whatever the kind is. So when we paid off one, then we take the money that we paid off that one and we apply it to a different card. Basically doubling the amount or tripling or whatever. Right. So that's the snowball effect. When you paid off one liability, you take the money that you paid that liability off with in the past and you apply it to a new or existing debt as you go along. Okay? Do not procrastinate. Period. Don't procrastinate. And then the next one is cancel credit cards. You only need 1 or 2 max. I speak from experience. I kept them because I wanted to kind of use them for illustrations. I have 9 credit cards. They're all canceled. Okay? So I have an American Express now. I have a MasterCard and I have a Visa. I have 3 credit cards. Because when you travel, some are better than the others and whatnot. But that's enough. You don't need 9. Period. And do you believe that I'm average? I am average. I'm mediocre, average American. And that means that you are too. That means that on average, some other people, statistically speaking, also have between 7 to 10 credit cards. In fact, there are people who have 13 credit cards. Can you imagine that? Think about it. Buy less. You have to buy less. I mean, why would we buy 3, 4, 5 kinds of stuff? Why? I mean, do you know how much power? Oh, I'm passionate about this one. There's so much power in simplicity. Have 1 computer, have 1 car, or 2, it depends on your family situation, or have 3 or 4 shirts. And now again, depends on your work and all that. But the point is, have less is best. You spend less on energy, you spend less on washing, you spend less on organizing, you have more time for other things. Buy less. I know that we don't think about this because our economy, as I mentioned earlier, is predicated on consumption. And if we don't buy a lot, then the economy goes into stall mode, if you will. But let other people take care of that. Statistically speaking, people will buy stuff, but don't be one of them. There's always somebody who's going to buy it. And if they want to, let them be. I mean, hey, if you want to strengthen the economy, go ahead. Full steam ahead. I support you. But when you are to the tune of $14,500 in debt, you cannot afford to be that, okay, dare I say patriotic in terms of finance and spending? I'm a patriot. I have a huge flag on my house. I love America. But boy, I don't want to finance everybody's corner office just because they woke up like that. I just don't. Let other people do that. Cancel overdraft protection. I'm gonna let you do that if you want to. It depends on behavior. Sometimes it's better to pay $60 in fees or whatnot. But here's the deal: if you don't have overdraft protection, you will be embarrassed at the checkout because nobody's going to take your card, but you will save yourself $60. So which one is better? I'll let it up for you to decide. Okay, so those are some of the things that I wanted to share with you about debt management. A couple more here are downsizing. Okay, we're skimming a little bit the surface of the next few presentations here. Downsizing. Do we really need everything that big? And you might say, well, wait a minute, I have a puny little house. I have a little car that barely runs. What do you want me to downsize to? A tricycle? I can't tricycle myself to work. What I'm trying to say here is, you know yourself better than anybody else. I know myself. I know those areas where I can do better. And that's the principle. We're talking about principles here that are customized to particular situations and environments that are good to me personally. I mean, I might not be able to downsize to a smaller house, but I could buy less clothing, or I could do less shopping, or whatever the case might be. Again, you see, this is goal setting. And goal setting is behavioral sometimes in nature. Or I should say, I personally believe it's 100% almost. Well, not 100%, but there are some environmental factors and variables there. But most of the times when you set goals, financial in nature, you always have to think about behavior. Because think about it. If you're in debt, if you're financially unstable, why are you in that particular predicament? Behavior. You chose a course of action that got you there. Now, there is a caveat. There's medical bills, medical stuff, or loss of a job, or divorce. There are major cataclysmic events in people's lives that you have to kind of allow for, and those are not your fault all the time. So we kind of have to be fair, and I understand that. But for the most part, discretionary debt or debt incurred on finance that we don't have is habitual and sometimes a behavioral. I should say most of the times behavioral. Get a second job sometimes, right? That will do the trick. It's not funny, it's not good, it takes a lot of time away, but when you think about debt management, a second job will bring in the income so you can pay off that debt fast, and then you can start a new life independently from all this. Now, debt counseling is very, very important because sometimes we are so subjective and so deep in some of these issues that we can't think straight. Think about, why do divorced people get counseling? Because emotionally they are so wrapped up in that situation that they can't think for themselves. So they go to a shrink, to a psychologist and whatnot, and they talk with them, and they're able to go and work through this, and they get well, and their life is good again after a while. The same thing with finance. You have to have a competent, good financial advisor or professional who can help you through these things, because sometimes you can't do it by yourself. And that's not a shame. We have this stigma in our society sometimes that, oh, if I can't do this, oh man, I'm not good enough, and I have to be like Horatio Alger. I have to pick up myself by my bootstraps because I'm an American and I'm rugged and I'm independent and all that kind of stuff. Well, guess what? It doesn't work that way all the time. Period. Some of it is folklore, some of it is just culture, some of it is just pure baloney sometimes. I'm sorry to say that. There are some elements like that, but not all of it. And on very rare occasions, some people have to file bankruptcy because they don't have any other options. Now, I'm a Christian, and I don't believe in bankruptcy myself personally. I believe that if you buy it and you spend the money, pay back, because somebody's job and somebody's future depends on that too. So it's not right, it's not ethical if you do something not to take responsibility. The factor here is the responsibility. Take ownership of your mistakes. This is the only country on the planet that if you take responsibility for your mistakes, you will have a second and third and fourth and fifth chance, if you will. Try this in Europe. You will never be able to do that. In Europe, if you're bankrupt, you're done, socially and economically. Here, if you're bankrupt, but you have a schedule to pay back and make creditors whole again and all that, there's a particular process for that. People and corporations, they go in and out of bankruptcies and they have a second chance and all, because people understand that sometimes things come in your life that is not your fault. I mean, most bankruptcies today are medically or divorce or job loss related. Now tell me, if you lose your job because the economy turns south, why is that your job? Why is that your fault? If your mate of 20, 30 years decides to leave you for a younger version of you, why is that your fault? Think about it. If you decide, if all of a sudden fate decides that you have to have cancer or a heart attack or something, and you are in convalescent for X amount of months or years, and you have to be rehabilitated in a medical facility, and you have medical bills to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of dollars, why is that your fault? You see what I'm saying? Sometimes it's not your fault. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. And in those particular situations where you're way overhead of your head and you can't deal, and there's an ethical way of winding up debts, the court system is the answer for some people. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to rush and get a bankruptcy, because that's not fair, right? So is it possible to live well? Oh, yeah, obviously. A lot of people do. Now, we have 10 more minutes left, and I'm going to go through 10 more slides here. When it comes to goal setting, debt is the number one goal. I am going to be debt-free by X time. So this is what we have to do. We have to write a piece of paper, or we have to type it up if you're more inclined, technologically inclined, if you will. And you say, I, Andrew Radui, decided today, May 21st, 2017, at 6:15, that I'm going to be debt-free by, and you put it down, you make some calculations. I have $10,000 in debt. It's going to take me, this is my income I have in. It's going to take me X amount of time to get out of that debt. That means I'm putting all other expenses, purchases on hold. And it's going to take me, on average, 32 months or 48 months or 56 months or whatever X amount of time. And you look into the future and you calculate that and you say, I'm going to be debt-free by May 21st of 2020. And you write it down, and you sign it, and you go to some other two people who you trust. Okay, that when I say trust here, it means that they look at you, understand you, accept you, and when they realize that you have debt to the tune of $10,000 or whatever it is, they will not go and badmouth you and gossip about you, because perhaps they are in the same situation, or perhaps they have been in this situation, they understand. You help them sign that piece of paper, and you make them accountability partners to your journey. And then you go and legalize that paper with a notary public, if you have the courage. If you don't want to do that, then just have those two people witness and sign it, and tell them, if I don't keep up my end of my bargain, I'll pay you $1 for every time I fall. And hold them to it. And hold them to it. And hold yourself to it. Because when you have other people involved, there is a little bit of a, how should I say this very politely, an ego factor involved too. Well, I don't really want to fall down. I don't really want to owe $50-some to my friend. Right? I just don't want to do that. Okay, you don't have to do this, but this is just an example of what you could do to put a little teeth in your decision. Because if you do that, then you show yourself that you're serious about this. This is not just another fly-by, some new flavor of the month type of activity that you want to go by. Right? So you do that. And then the second thing is, you have to reevaluate a little bit major purchases. We'll talk about that. I'm not going to go too deep into this right now today, but buying a home, are we going to buy it for 30 years, 15 years? Are we going to buy it on ARMs or balloons? I'm going to explain all this stuff, what that means. ARMs means are adjustable rate mortgages, which means it readjusts every so often, depending on the terms of a contract. Balloons, again, means that after a certain time, depending on the contract, how the contract is drawn up, you have a big balloon payment that you have to pay, but we'll go into these more in depth later. PMIs, that means private mortgage insurance. If you don't have the money to buy a house, some people can't afford to buy a house, you should stop and save first instead of paying PMI. PMI is basically a third party is insuring the bank or the lender that in case that you default on the house, then they will be paid back. So let's say if I buy a house for a couple of $100,000 and I don't have at least 20% to put down, then I have to pay PMI. PMI, and think about this. This is just phenomenal how they came up with this. The bank is insured, the lender who gave me the money, they are insured because I am paying that insurance to them. Think about it. It's just phenomenal how everything works. So that's what PMI is. Insurance, property taxes, upkeep and maintenance. Of course, most of all, you cannot buy more than you afford. Some people, I want that 3,200 square foot house. Well, and you're just married, just fresh out of college, with $200,000 in debt because of graduate studies, and you need a 3,200 square foot house. Or let's go on the flip side. You're winding down your working years, you're just ready for retirement, you have that 3,200 square foot house, and you say, no, I got to keep it. I have a lot of memories in this house. My baby boy was brought home from the hospital in this house, and I just don't want to sell it. Right? Obviously, I'm exaggerating. But do you really need a 3,200 square foot house, clean it, maintain it, take care of it when you're by yourself because your spouse perhaps is deceased? You don't need that. So there's certain things that you have to reevaluate on both ends. And then, of course, we're going to go through calculating and house price and all that, how that works, and credit scores and whatnot. Now let's go to the car a little bit. And this is just a preview of what we're going to talk about in the next few days here. Major car purchases, how to buy a car, for example, on cash, loan, or lease. We'll go into how is a car the most expensive? What's the way to buy a car the most expensive way?
Lease.
Exactly. Dave Ramsey calls it the fleece. Because you're fleeced. And again, when we're joking and having a little fun because finance is a little bit heavy sometimes. We're not making fun and poking fun because we're mean to the banks and whatnot. It's just based in business. People who work in banks and they are people who have sons who go to college and they have their own families and all that. That's just a job. There's nothing evil about it. It's just the way we structured our society. It's just, do you really want to do that? Do you really want to give them the money when you could keep it yourself? I mean, do you really want to buy a car on a lease and give it back to them 2 years later and have nothing to show for when you could go buy a very good used car, somebody else paid the depreciation on it, and you still have a wonderful car? I mean, why would you buy it like that? I don't know. I mean, some people like to buy it. Now, obviously, we know that cars lose their values every year, about 15 to 20%. So you don't really want to do that because other people can do that, right? I love this because my wife obviously has a BMW, right? So I have to poke fun at it for a little bit. Now, the reason why my wife has a BMW is not because we wanted a BMW, is because it was the cheapest way to afford a car. And you might not believe me, but this is how it is. When we found out that we were going to have triplets, we said, okay, what's the best car for our family situation? So we said, well, we're going to go with a Honda Pilot or a minivan. But obviously, you don't want to buy something that is really, really cheap and not safe on the road. You could have bought a car that is like $2,000, $3,000 and the wheel is falling off or whatever. Sometimes those are not good bets. So we wanted to go with a Honda Pilot or a Honda Odyssey, some of those vans. Do you know how much they charge for that kind of stuff? Used. They're not brand new. Used. Any guesses?
40,000?
Well, new they are about 30,000, 40,000, but used they're in the 20 and high 20s. I mean, and we were always looking for Hondas. We didn't look for anything else. Honda has a reputation for safety and reliability and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not making a plug for Honda, but that's what we want to do. Honda. Let's go with Honda. We could not find a Honda. So we went on Craigslist and we found this car that she has. It has 3 rows, so which means 7 passenger. Of course, the last couple of passengers in the back have to be midgets because that's just pretty much it. You can't put regular human beings on there. And it was way, way cheaper than we even budgeted. Now think about it. It has 100,000 miles on it. It's about a 10-year-old car. Nothing fancy about it. It's nothing fancy, but you can afford it. And you don't have to go into huge debt or an arm and a leg to buy something that you can afford. Now, we couldn't afford $30,000 cars or $40,000 cars. We didn't want to buy and pay someone else's interest. So we bought a car that was available. We could have been a Skoda Fabia, or it could have been a Chevy Suburban, or whatever the case might be. But this was the cheapest. So that's why I put this picture with the BMW on it, because you buy it for example, for, I don't know, $30,000 new, which is actually a low price. It's way higher than that. And then you drive them down the lot, 0.01 mile, and you lost $2,600 already. Think about that. You lost $2,600 because you drive it less than 1/10 of a mile.
Gee.
So let somebody else pay that appreciation and buy something cheaper. So obviously there are several other things that we'll talk about in the investing and saving space. Do not save what is left after spending, but spend what is left after saving. Who said that? Warren Buffett. And don't you think that if somebody has about $80 billion or something like that, we should kind of halfway pay attention to what he's saying?
Yeah.
I mean, the guy is a good guy. He has a moniker of Oracle of Omaha for some reason. Don't you think so? Now, there are several other quotes here by him, and I'm not going to go into all of them, but the few that I like are some of these. Do not save what is left. We already said, never test the depth of the river with both feet. Do not pull all eggs in one basket. Honesty is a very expensive gift. Do not expect it cheap from people. Never depend on a single income. Make investments to create a second source. And we'll talk about all those a little bit later. Now, what I'd like to finish up here with is to kind of give you like a kernel of thinking into the future. About 3 days from now, we'll talk about savings and investing. Think about developing an emergency fund. How many of you guys have an emergency fund that can cover $1,000? Oh, good. Some of you guys do. Which means that you have $1,000 cash tucked away somewhere in a safety deposit box or whatever the case might be. Don't tell me. I'm not going to go to your house. Okay? But you are having accessibility to those funds. If something would happen tomorrow, would you be able to access those funds? You don't have to borrow. You don't have to sell your 401k or whatnot. Only used for emergencies and specifically emergencies. Now, how many of you guys have at least 6 months worth of expense tucked away for in case you lose your job? Okay, one person. Well, actually 2. Think about it. If you lose your job today, will you be able to be able to live for 6 months with no incoming income? And it's quite mind-boggling, isn't it? Think about it. We'll talk about how to do that. So again, as we finish up, goals. What's the first goal? Number 1 goal when it comes to finance? No more debt. That's the biggest thing. You will see as we go through the several next few days, as we go through this presentation and seminar, that debt is the biggest major drain on everything. From financial stability to broken down marriages. Out of the 51% of marriages being divorced or being terminated in this country, out of that percentage, 52%, a high majority of percentages are due to financial distress. Not even infidelity, which used to be the main cause for divorce, infidelity. You cheated someone and they say, okay, sayonara, I'm out of here. Nope. It's finance. Now think about that. Saving and investing. We'll talk about how to invest, how to save. We'll talk about equities, stocks, dividends, and so on. We'll talk about bonds, brokerage houses. We talk about what a corporation is, electronic stocks, patience, and we'll go through some examples. I'll give you some examples, specific examples, how to. I'm not going to give you advice, but I'm giving you mock examples how you can invest in some of the corporations that are called blue chip or dividend and whatnot. Those are good. And then finally, but not last, retirement and estate planning. Just think about it. Estimated retirement health care costs for 55-year-old couple retiring in 10 years. So these are 2015 numbers. So that means what? 2022 or so. It will cost $463,000 for the duration of their lives.
For healthcare?
Do you know how much a healthcare care costs per month in a nursing home facility?
Around $6,000 a month.
About $6,000 a month.
That's cheap.
Is it cheap?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you have about 4,000, between 4 and 5,000. That's about $55,000 a year. So 1 year, 1 annum per year to be in a nursing home facility would cost you anywhere between $50,000 and $60,000. If you live, let's say you have a debilitating disease such as something that you can't do much and you have to be in a nursing home. If you have to live between 15 to 20 years, do the math.
Wow.
Do the math. Every year, $55,000, between $50,000 to $60,000. So you see, these are the reasons why you have to be very honest and take an advanced look at some of these things, because statistically, you could be one of them. I could be one of them who needs some medical care or so on. We have to think about when we'll retire, what is going to be the source for our income, will it be enough? Are we factoring in any medical care or nursing home care? What are the sources for income? Some people like to work after retirement because they like to work, and that's totally fine. But some people are made or forced to work because of the circumstances. They just don't have enough money to live on. And some people are sick. I mean, I see sometimes in retail stores when you go in, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to name names here, but some retail stores, they have some of these wonderful people, and they are wonderful, and you could see that they have to do it, and they don't want to be there, but they have to do it. Now, think about dignity again. We started this whole seminar with that process. We're talking about in the greatest, wealthiest country on the planet, why do I have to be in this predicament? And some of it is environmental, but some of it you can change, or at least we can mitigate. We can alter to some extent. Now, there's not always a lot of time, but there's some time. All right, last slide here. What are we talking about? Retirement income sources? Well, it's going to be Social Security, pension funds, savings, IRAs, and so on and so forth. So that's pretty much what I'm going to share right now with you. And I would like to open it up now for questions.